Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining me on the first ever Livestock Extension Group Virtual Field Day. This Field Day program is brought to you by Cooperative Extension Service through the University of Hawaii at Manoa. My name is Savannah Katulski and I am the Livestock Extension Agent on Kauai. And the topic of this particular presentation is going to be a brief discussion on the mineral requirements for small ruminants. And by small ruminants, I mean sheep and goats. Minerals are typically discussed in two different categories, macrominerals and microminerals. Macrominerals are needed in larger quantities within the diet, and they are typically expressed and talked about as a percentage of the diet as a whole, especially on feed tag labels and mineral labels. The macrominerals we're going to discuss today and that are most important for sheep and goats are calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, sulfur, sodium, and chlorine. Sodium and chlorine are often discussed together because combined they make sodium chloride or salt, which is essential in a small ruminant's diet. Microminerals are needed in smaller amounts within the diet, and they are typically expressed as ppm or parts per million. The microminerals that are important to consider for normal function for sheep and goats are cobalt, copper, iodine, manganese, molybdenum, selenium, and zinc. Oftentimes, people see macrominerals and microminerals and assume that the macrominerals are more important because they are needed in larger quantities. However, macrominerals and microminerals are equally important, and regardless of the amount required, all are necessary for normal body function and efficient production. There are a wide variety of different places that small ruminants or sheep and goats can access minerals within their diet. The first and foremost, and the reason why the picture is so giant on your screen, is forage and or feed. It is important to understand the macro and micro mineral levels of your forages and also of your feed. For your feed, it's easy. You simply look at a feed tag. For the forages, it's important that you make sure that you have done some sort of forage analysis so that you can understand the nutrients within that forage. If the feed and forage that you're providing to your animals do not meet the minimum requirements for minerals discussed in this presentation, then it may be important to provide some sort of mineral to them independent of the feed and forage. That might be in the form of a block, that might be in the form of some sort of tub, or it might be in a form that's most commonly used, which is just a loose bagged mineral. From here on out, I'm going to break up this presentation into discussing macrominerals and discussing microminerals. I will briefly go over the importance of that specific mineral and the requirements for both sheep and goats. Oftentimes, sheep and goats have the same requirements, or they differ within certain types of production phases, such as lactation or maintenance or growth. I will also briefly mention some of the common signs of deficiencies. The first macromineral we're going to be discussing is calcium, and secondly, phosphorus. Before I go into phosphorus or calcium, it's important to remember that calcium and phosphorus are often discussed together. Calcium is important because it is the main component of bone, so it is important for bone formation. It is also important for muscle contraction, release of hormones, and much, much more. The requirements of calcium for goats is around 0.3 to 0.8%. It is typically higher for goats that are lactating. For sheep, the requirement is 0.2 to 0.4% dry matter diet. Again, it is going to be slightly higher for sheep that are lactating. Moving to phosphorus, phosphorus is also important for bone formation and makes up a significant amount of the bone. It also is important for different energy systems as it signals. It's also important for cell membranes and proper nerve tissue function and growth and more. The requirements for phosphorus are a little bit more ambiguous because they're mostly dependent on the calcium-phosphorus ratio. Calcium should always be in a greater quantity than phosphorus. The biggest concern is when phosphorus concentrations become greater than calcium. So in looking at your feed and your forage, it is important to make sure that you have at least a ratio of 1.5 calcium to 1 phosphorus. When you typically get greater than 7 calcium to 1 phosphorus, then you might see some issues, but anywhere within that range should be sufficient for your sheep and goats. Some signs of deficiencies of calcium and phosphorus can be growth retardation, issues with bone formation, abnormal muscle contraction and leg movement, and also just overall weight loss and poor doing. Moving into sodium and chlorine, otherwise known as salt. It's really important because it is used to entice and or control mineral intake. You'll find that most of your minerals that are bagged are going to contain salt as a carrier, and that is typically used as a way to limit and also entice animals to eat the rest of that mineral. It is also important for the absorption of nutrients, and without going into too much detail, it is an important aspect of the communication and delivery and transportation of nutrients. And then it also is important for protein digestion, and that is specific to chlorine. The salt requirements for sheep and goats are about the same, and that is 0.2 to 0.5% of the diet in terms of the diet dry matter. It is important to also note that salt breeze or any remnant of salt on the feed or forage does not provide sufficient amount of salt to the animals. The next mineral I'm going to talk about is magnesium, and it is again essential for bone formation, energy production, and is especially important for carb and lipid production. The requirements for magnesium are 0.12 to 0.2% in goats, and it is the same 0.12 to 0.20% in sheep. A common sign of magnesium deficiency is grass tetany. Moving into potassium, potassium is really important for enzyme function, which might seem kind of small, but enzymes are the basis for everything that happens within the body. It's also important for cell balance and how nutrients can flow in and out of cells. It helps with fluid transport, and it also is necessary for some of the signaling that's needed for hormone release. The requirements are the same for sheep and goats, 0.5 to 0.8% of the diet in terms of diet dry matter. Depending on the production phase, it can be higher for lactating animals. So that 0.8% is going to be closer to an animal that is in peak lactation, whereas the 0.5 might be the maintenance requirement. Signs of potassium deficiency are reduced growth and other feed efficiency reductions. Also, an extreme sign of potassium deficiency is the hump on the back of the animals that can sometimes occur. The last macro mineral we're going to talk about, and certainly not the least, is sulfur. Sulfur often gets a bad rep because it can cause some negative impacts in too large of quantities in the diet, mostly in the way that it can antagonize or prevent the absorption of some minerals, but it is still essential because it is found in many amino acids and therefore is imperative for protein deposition and growth. It is also important for milk and hair production. The requirements for sulfur for both sheep and goats is 0.22% and is 0.26% during lactation. Some signs of sulfur deficiency are overall poor animal performance, which is something that you're going to see within many mineral deficiencies, as well as hair loss, excessive salivation, tearing of the eyes, and overall weakness due to its important role in protein deposition. Switching gears a little bit, we're going to start talking about the microminerals, which is a special interest of mine. And we're going to start with the two blue minerals, cobalt and copper. Cobalt's main role is the importance it plays in vitamin B12 synthesis. Cobalt's requirement for goats is 0.11 parts per million. Again, remember we talk about microminerals in ppm. And in sheep, it's 0.1 to 0.2 ppm. It is also important to note that sheep are at a greater risk for cobalt deficiency, so be sure that you have adequate cobalt in your feed and forage or within your supplement. Moving into copper, which is my own special little niche, as some of you may know. Copper is important for immune system function, collagen formation. It plays a significant role in the absorption of iron, pigment of the hair and skin, nervous system function, and has also been used to help control internal parasites in sheep and goats. The requirements for goats are slightly greater than the requirements for sheep. The requirements for goats are 15 to 25 parts per million, and that varies depending on the stage of production. Sheep have a lower requirement and are at a greater risk for copper toxicity. The requirements for sheep are 7 to 11 parts per million. Now, I will say that due to the high levels of molybdenum, sulfur, and iron in our soils, and therefore our forages, sheep that are often grazing in Hawaii's pasture systems don't have an extreme risk for copper toxicity due to the fact that there are minerals that are within the forage that actually reduce the absorption of copper. Some symptoms of copper deficiency are going to be in this, what you see here in this picture, and that's kind of the back legs have very poor leg function and they kind of drag their back feet like that. It's otherwise known as ataxia. Next, looking at iodine. Iodine is important for thyroid hormone function, and thyroid hormones are important for digestion, muscle formation, immunity, and reproduction. As some of you may know from your own human nutrition knowledge, iodine is important to make sure that you don't have the creation of goiters, which are basically those lumps that you'll see in the neck of this lamb here. The requirements for iodine are the same for sheep and goats, and that is 0.5 to 0.8 ppm, and it is greater, more at that 0.8 ppm during lactation. Moving into iron, which is important for oxygen and CO2 transport to and from the lungs, and is also important for connective tissue formation. You can see here that this goat has really, really pale upper lip, and this is anemia, which is a symptom of iron deficiency. It can also be a symptom of heavy parasite load, but I won't get into that too much. The requirements for iron are 35 parts per million at a maintenance level, and it is greater for animals that are growing, so around that 95 ppm. For sheep, it varies between 30 and 100 parts per million depending on the production phase. As I mentioned before, Hawaii's forages have pretty high levels of iron, so we don't typically see a lot of iron deficiencies in the state. Another interesting thing to note is that extreme iron deficiency, because of its role in connective tissue formation, can sometimes cause sudden death disease, where it looks like an animal might have had a heart attack, and that is because the connective tissues in the heart are thinned, and the pressure can sometimes result in the rupturing of some of those important arteries. Manganese, not to be confused with magnesium, is very important for bone formation, blood clotting, fat deposition, and reproduction. The requirements for manganese are 20 to 100 parts per million in goats and 20 to 25 parts per million in sheep. Some signs of deficiency are severe skeletal abnormalities, severe abnormalities in different joints, leg deformity, and ataxia, which is a symptom of copper deficiency as well. And manganese deficiency can cause extreme depression in estrus and poor conception rates, and also can reduce fat deposition in growing and finishing animals. Molybdenum is an often unknown or under talked about micromineral, and its main role is in enzyme function. In terms of its requirements, 0.1 parts per million for goats and 0.5 parts per million are what have been thrown out by all the scientists and researchers that focus on the nutrient requirements of sheep and goats. However, minimum molybdenum requirements are relatively unknown. Some signs of molybdenum deficiency are very, very hard to recognize because they're things like reduced intake, poor growth, poor reproductive failure, and overall just poor efficiency. Next, talking about selenium and zinc, and this is going to be the last two microminerals that I'm going to talk about. And selenium is important for the structural proteins, and it is a component of all the structural proteins. It's also important for growth and development. Goats require the same amount of selenium as sheep, and that is 0.1 to 0.3 parts per million. And we'll also note that there is a regulation on how much selenium can be added to a feed or to a mineral, and that is at 0.3 parts per million in terms of the dry matter of the diet. A common symptom of selenium deficiency is white muscle disease, which is something that we all kind of know as the sign of selenium deficiency. You can see here this lamb is exhibiting some issues with motor function and muscle function and overall mobility issues. And then this is a picture here of an animal on the left with normal muscling, and then this animal on the right has white muscle disease, and you can see all that white muscling in there. The last micromineral that I'm going to talk about, and another one of my favorites besides copper, is zinc. And zinc is especially important for growth, fatty acid metabolism, and protein metabolism. It's also important for overall appetite. It plays a significant role in immunity. Zinc and copper both play a very big role in immunity, and then also is important for gene expression. Zinc is the micromineral that is very important to look at when you're trying to grow and finish animals, because a deficiency can have significant impacts on the overall growth, efficiency, and performance of those animals. The goats and the sheep have the same requirement, which is 20 to 40 parts per million. And a common symptom of zinc deficiency is going to be this hair loss here in this picture that you can see in the top right corner. And also just overall poor performance, anorexia, skeletal and reproductive disorders, and impairment of the immune system. My final soapbox moment is going to be that you need to make sure you have adequate nutrition. I know oftentimes macro and micro minerals are second rate to protein and energy, and it is true that you'll see more significant improvements in overall animal performance by making sure protein and energy requirements are being met. But macro and micro minerals are still essential for normal body function, and they play a behind the scenes role in a lot of enzyme, body functions, digestion, growth, skeletal formation, all of those things. And so it is important to make sure you have adequate nutrition across the board. My recommendation is to make sure that you are analyzing your forages if that's the main source of feed for your animals. This picture here is a step-by-step how-to to take a look at your forages. You'll cut it, you'll make sure you have a good amount. I recommend you write down the types of forages you have. In this example, it's perennial peanut and guinea grass, and then you can dry it. You can dry it in a microwave, you can dry it in an oven, or you can dry it simply by putting it in a paper bag, throwing it in your pickup, and letting it heat up and stay in there for a few days. Once you kind of know what the nutrition is from your feed and or forage, you may need to select a mineral. The two recommendations I have is to select a commercially available mineral that is made for sheep or goats. I know I talked about the fact that sheep are at a lower risk of copper toxicity due to the presence of high levels of iron, molybdenum, and sulfur in our forages, but it is important to make sure that you are buying minerals that are specific for either the sheep or the goats because of the higher levels of copper. And especially now, because copper is often used to reduce parasite loads, that you just pay attention to that copper level in your sheep. Another option is that if you're large enough, you can have an individualized mineral created, and that would be based on your forages. Now, I know that was a quick and dirty overview on the mineral requirements for sheep and goats, but if you have any questions at all, be sure to contact your local extension agent or specialist for assistance, and we would love to help you with any of your mineral questions. And with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for tuning in to this Livestock Extension Group virtual field day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the talks that are up on this playlist. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to any like member.